I know that it sounds like a rabbit, but it wasn't. This happened about 2 hours ago. I stepped outside. This took place in southeastern Pennsylvania, the venue I was at to have a smoke, when about 40 yards off in the distance I see this creature, sitting in a way I can only describe as like a gargoyle perched on a ledge. It clearly had arms and legs, and not just forelegs like a rabbit or cat would. Its face was kind of hidden in the shadows of the night, but it kind of had a head shaped like a mouse from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It saw me and took these two kind of hops to its right, my left, and that's when I noticed its tail. It reminded me of a white-tailed deer's tail. Where the top was, it had dark silver or black fur, but right underneath it was white fur. It was a short tail also, not long like a cat or dog's tail. It just took those two hops and was gone. No noise. Nothing. I just stood there, super puzzled. I saw it clear and unobstructed from objects until it hopped behind this house. If anyone has seen anything similar, I'd be happy to hear. Before the pandemic, I was visiting West Canada, just exploring caves. When I'm pretty deep inside of one, perhaps 70 meters in, I get to this pretty tall section of cavern, and then I hear it. A scuffling noise. I put it off, thinking that it was just some rocks moving. I turn off my headlamp, and then I see them. These two glowing eyes. Glowing yellow eyes. So I turned my lamp on again, and what I saw this time was terrible. There was this grayish thing. It looked humanoid, but its arms and legs were too long and splayed out weirdly. Its claws were long, and they looked like they could easily slice through Kevlar. Its teeth were long as well. Its skin was super tight around its ribs and spine. I could see its bones. It screeched a horrible noise. I had to cover my ears. I look back, and it's gone. But I hear this low growl. Well, I felt it more than I heard it. So I start slowly heading back, and it starts moving toward me, so I start running. Pretty close to the exit, I could see the sunset. I felt its breath on me. As soon as I reached the exit, though, it pulled back. Bystanders said they saw it too, that it ran away like lightning. I'm never going to those caves again. We saw something we can't explain. About a year ago, I was out back with my family. It was around 8 and the sun was setting. We lived in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. The closest neighbor was far away. Something down in the field kept catching my eye, but I ignored it at first. My sister saw it too and kept looking out towards the trees. She was getting freaked out by it. My mom said to go investigate, so me and my sister started to walk across the field towards the tree line. Big mistake. It's hard for me to describe. This was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. I didn't see it at first, and I didn't understand why my sister was so scared, until we were about 100 yards away, when I saw this creature. Tall. Probably around 8 or 9 feet tall. White, humanoid, with an elongated head, and no face. It had long arms and peeked out around the trees. We stopped in our tracks. We couldn't tell what it was. It took a few steps further out of the trees and swayed back and forth at me like a praying mantis. Me and my sister ran screaming back to the house where my mom stood, jaw dropped. She saw it too. I have never been so scared in my life. We grabbed the binoculars and watched this terrifying creature peek in and out of the tree line, spying on us. My grandma thought we all had a wild imagination. The sun was almost gone now, and it was getting really dark, and the darker it got, the more the thing moved. Back and forth along the trees. It was terrifying, so we went in for the night and locked everything up tight. I couldn't sleep that night. I was hearing scratching on the roof, and at one point a very loud bang and various noises coming from the barn. I was very afraid that I would wake up to my animals missing. The next morning, my grandma asked if we had heard the loud bang outside that night. She ended up taking my grandpa with her on her morning walk. I have no idea what it was, and it haunts me to this day. After some deliberation, I made the decision to post about my family's experience with duende, or dwarves. My mom is from the Philippines, and there are many tales of supernatural creatures roaming every stretch of the country. Most sound ludicrous and exaggerated, but none more so than the duende and the experience I'm going to relay now. My grandmother kept some chickens and dogs who roamed the grounds, including a pair of turkeys who would wander underneath the house and freak me out as a child. One day, when I was still small enough to walk underneath the house dodging cobwebs and such, I came across some tall, thickly painted red crosses on the stilts, and by the high wall surrounding one side of the house. Having never noticed this before, I asked my mom about it, who proceeded to tell me what they were about. To set the scene, it's important to know details about my mom's family home in the farming provincial area of North Philippines. My grandparents were rice farmers, and my mom and 3 of her siblings lived in the house with them, either studying at university or working in the nearby city in finance. A typical Tagalog house, raised on stilts, was built sometime during the 1950s, and had dark mahogany-type floors and furniture. The floor where the dining room crosses into the kitchen, however, is made from bamboo, and is springy when walked across. There are small gaps in between these, whereby you can see down to the ground underneath the house. The whole compound was fairly sized, with concrete and brick walls, 8 feet tall, studded with broken glass for security. My mom lived with her other female siblings, and chores were always shared, including laundry. No one's clothes were kept separate, and everyone's clothing went into one wash basin. The clothes were then hung on various clotheslines in the backyard. Her youngest sibling, Ella, was around 21 at the time, and started to notice her underwear missing from the washing line, prominent gaps where panties were supposed to be drying in the sun. Thinking nothing of it, and putting it down to birds or other siblings playing pranks on her, she ignored it. Weeks passed, and buying knickers was getting to be an expensive habit. Angry and frustrated about the prank, Ella questioned everyone about why they were picking on her. No one owned up to stealing her panties, with everyone absolutely firm and adamant that it wasn't them, with retorts of, "Why on earth would we do that?" Ella grew less angry, and just remained frustrated at why it was only her underwear missing from a line of 6 other people's. The maids were questioned, and again, firm shakes of heads followed. There was absolutely no reason for the stealing. The knickers were not expensive and, dare I say it, some full of holes. There was completely no reason as to why they were being taken, and of course to wear, and for what purpose. The washing was monitored for signs of animals or birds stealing them, and nothing was noted. If it were an animal, it would be very clever for them to only know to steal from one particular person. After so many weeks of this happening, my grandfather, having had enough of the whole situation, called a local mangula, or psychic, to take a look at the house and investigate who or what might be causing the distress. The mangula took a walk around the compound and immediately picked up that my family weren't the only ones living at that residence. She sat the family down upstairs and revealed that she had discovered a small family of duende living under the coconut trees, stretching their territory right up to the area underneath the house itself. Everyone was shocked and slightly bewildered, as no one was particularly superstitious. Yes, they had all heard about the little folk as folklore, but never had any connection with them. She mentioned that the duende were usually tree-living beings, and because they were invisible to people with their third eye closed, only certain people could pick up on their presence. Third eye being the psychic or sixth sense that allows people to see through the veil of our normal world and into another crossover. It is customary in Filipino culture to always say "excuse me" when walking under trees or in long grass to avoid stepping on the creatures. If you do not, the duende can cast revenge, either making you sick or injured shortly after. They are both good and bad, trickster and malicious duende. The mangula was able to see that the culprit of Ella's panty stealing was a duende of that family living there. She was able to attest to the reason why as well. You see, that particular duende had a huge crush on Ella and would steal her panties, probably to become noticed or for other unmentionable means. Ella and the family were then led under the house, whereby every single pair of missing panties were found, tightly and neatly folded and stuffed into cracks. The mangula blessed the house with holy coconut oil, and prayers were said to move on the family of duende. Afterward, it was advised that red crosses were to be painted underneath the house, and white crosses placed in windows to draw away or discourage anything spiritual to reside there again. To this day, the house is still standing, with its fortress of crosses. Who knows whether or not anything managed to slip past the warnings, and is residing there currently, dormant, against the will of my family. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was living in Houston with my parents studying for the bar exam. I would get up every morning around 4 a.m. to go run about 5 miles before starting my long days of studying. By the time night rolled around, I was exhausted and had no trouble falling or staying asleep. My room was on the first floor, which was just a single room next to the garage. The second floor is where the kitchen, dining room, and living room were, and the third floor is where the guest bedroom and my parents were located. My parents rarely came to my room because they knew I was either studying or sleeping. This particular night all was normal. I finished studying, took a shower, and fell asleep to the sound of the Golden Girls on TV. I always set the timer on my TV so I could fall asleep whenever and not have to worry. Well, later that night after dozing off, I was woken up by the sound of someone breathing heavily. It sounded like they were struggling to breathe. It was as if they had smoke in their lungs and couldn't. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I didn't open my eyes because I didn't want whatever it was to know that I was awake, and I was freaked out and didn't want to see what was there. I knew it wasn't either of my parents immediately. I could feel the heat from the breath on my mouth. I slowly and carefully opened my eyes the slightest amount, and what I saw will haunt me forever. I was wide awake by this time. I could see this tall creature standing over me from my left. It was darker than the darkest of my room, and it was breathing into my mouth. When I got a good look at it, I was even more terrified. It wasn't your normal, everyday figure, although a black figure in your room at night isn't normal, period. It looked like it had tree branches growing out of it. It had them coming out of its head and its arms. I can only explain it as looking like Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, but I hadn't seen that movie at the time. If the movie was even out yet at all. It wasn't until over 4 years later that I saw it, and immediately thought of my experience. But Groot looks harmless. He's kind looking. Whatever was in my room wasn't kind looking, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I knew I couldn't just lay there and let it do whatever it wanted, so I tried to say a prayer. I closed my eyes and screamed out the Lord's Prayer, and instantly it was gone. I slept with the lights on all night for weeks. To this day, I get freaked out when I wake up in the middle of the night, which is now very often. I frequently wonder about my experience. I can't decide if I think it was a demon or some sort of an alien. I don't usually tell people this story because they don't believe me, but I will go to my grave swearing it's the truth. I saw something tonight. I just got home from my job delivering pizzas in a small town in North Carolina, and my heart is still pounding from what I saw. I just started recently, and this is my first night shift. I hope it was my last. I was going back to the store after a delivery, a little after 9 p.m., when I saw it riding towards me on a bicycle. It looked like a person for the most part, but it was wearing one of those blank plastic Halloween masks like you can get at any store. The mask had a wavy line from the top left, wearer's right, to the bottom right, which separated the mask into a purple half and an orange half. I couldn't tell what it was wearing because it was too dark and the clothes were black. Out of the top of the mask, there was something that could have been hair, but it seemed too strange to me. The hair was at least a foot tall on its own, and the only way I can describe it is as a plant of some sort. It looked like a bunch of tangled branches and vines all sprouting from the thing's head. It was doing a wheel stand all the way down the street toward me without losing an iota of balance. The thing that really tipped me off that it wasn't human, though, was the aura it gave. I couldn't stop looking at it for more than a second. It drew my eyes almost magnetically, and every second I did look at it, the more terrified I felt. It wasn't just my natural reaction of fear, either. This was powerful and evil. My head started pounding. I was screaming involuntarily, and tears welled up in my eyes. I was about to make a turn when I saw it coming toward me, and as soon as I completed the turn, barely able to look at where I was going, the thing disappeared. I turned around to look back down the street I was just on, and it was gone. I was still extremely rattled, panting and whining like a dog, but I knew I had to make it back to the store. I made a slight left onto the long avenue where my store is located when I saw it riding toward me again, still doing a wheel stand. It started out on my right, but rode around me to get on my left as I proceeded toward the store. I was trying my best to outrun it, but it was keeping up with me exactly until it suddenly jumped off the bike onto the sidewalk and caught it without effort. I was still screaming and tearlessly crying this whole time, but I whipped my truck into the store lot hoping it meant safety. To my horror, I saw a bicycle, not belonging to anyone in the store, leaned up against the wall directly in front of my parking spot. I looked across the street to where I had seen the thing hit the ground and saw that nothing was there. I hesitated to even leave my truck, but I had to complete my shift, so I went inside with my guard up as much as it could be considering how terrified I was. My coworkers were all fine, but there were no customers in the store. That's not unusual considering the time of night, but that meant that the bicycle's owner was MIA. I rubbed my face for a few moments in front of a fan and grabbed my next delivery.
I exited the store to discover the bicycle was gone, even though I hadn't noticed anyone move it. I worked the rest of my shift until 10 and didn't see the thing again. That's not to say that there was nothing out of the ordinary, but the bike stalker was gone at least. The whole way home, I was unnaturally paranoid. Around every curve and corner, I feared it would be standing in the road waiting for me. I could see it in my head. The vision I had of it standing on a certain bridge on my way home felt so real that I nearly drove into the creek. I'm home now, in what I hope is safety, but I'm definitely still on edge. I've seen a lot of things in my 20 years, but I have never experienced anything like that.
My friends and I used to camp a lot in the El Dorado National Forest. We had a spot along Sopiago Springs we used to camp at a lot. One weekend, we decided to go for a 3-day foraging trip. We brought in MREs in case we couldn't find anything, some guns, and some supplies to set up shelter, but that's about it. The first night was chill. We cooked a bunch of crawdads and a squirrel my buddy shot, drank a few beers we'd brought, and slept fine. Next day, something felt weird to me. One of my friends who was with me and I had had some really creepy experiences in this part of the forest in the past, and it felt a bit like those. Forest was dead silent, and you felt like something was watching you. I grew up in the woods, so I know the signs of a predator, but this felt different than a bear or a mountain lion. When night fell, my friends went 200 yards or so up the stream to do some stuff, and I was alone at the campsite. The feeling got even stronger, so I built up the fire nice and big and grabbed a gun. I kept hearing faint voices from the woods in the opposite direction from where my friends had went. They were low and distinct sounds, but they were creeping me out majorly, and my buddies had taken the only 2 flashlights. Poor planning in hindsight. As I peered out into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving 50 yards or so out into the trees. I snapped the rifle to my shoulder and got the scope on it. It was pretty dark, and the only light was from the fire, but I could see the outline of what I was aiming at. It looked human, but was on all 4s, and its arms seemed a lot longer than they should have been. It stood a bit like an ape, but very low to the ground. I only saw it for a second before it loped off deeper into the woods. After I lost track of it, I'd hear light rustling in different directions around the camp, leaves scuffling, the occasional twig breaking. Always away from where my friends went, 180 degrees on the other side of the camp from their departure. I got the sense that whatever it was stalking me. I kept the fire high and was staying sharp, looking out into the woods. But I didn't see it again. My buddies came back about 10 minutes later to find me a paranoid wreck glancing at the tree line with the scope. I told them what happened and they got quiet. Then told me the reason they came back when they did was they started hearing the same shit that I was hearing by where they were, and it had spooked them. We spent the second night of our trip with a big-ass fire and 3 lookouts. Nobody slept that night. In the morning, we broke camp as quick as we could and hightailed it out of there. We never camped in that spot again.
Something followed my friend and I through the woods. So this happened years ago while I was still in high school. I'm now 23 and have never shared this story anywhere, and only ever with a select few in person. I live in Missouri, just north of Kansas City. One night my buddy and I snuck out of my parents' house to go smoke. There was a trail that was right by my house and a local elementary school. Never really seen anything out there outside of deer, foxes, coyotes, etc. But growing up, we heard from parents and other families that the woods nearby were haunted. The area we lived in was right near an old slave farm, and I never gave it much thought. Being a kid who, yes, believes in Bigfoot, but has never seen any true proof, so I'm still pretty skeptical of stories. Anyways, back to my story. After we snuck out, we made it to the trail. On one side of it there was the back of the house, and on the other side was woods. As we were walking down the trail, it felt like any other time we had done it. For the first 3/4 of the trail, everything was fine. But as we came up to the final bend, my friend slapped me on the arm and pointed into the woods and asked if I had just saw that. I looked into the woods and saw nothing, so I blew it off and thought he was just out of it. So I kept walking like everything was fine while he still had his eyes glued to the woods. At the final stretch, about 50 yards, all canopied over, he slapped my arm again and stopped me. This time with force, so I looked over thinking it was still nothing. I saw a figure of something similar to a human shape, but standing about 8 feet high. The reason I saw it was since the trees by it were shaking. At this point, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but I was scared nonetheless. I said that we should keep moving, and we did. But now I too had my eyes glued on whatever it was in the woods. We picked up our pace to a speed walk, and after about 10 steps or so, the thing started to move as well, but on a path that would put it on the trail in front of us before the end. At that point, we looked at each other and immediately started running, like running as fast as we could. We made it to the end of the trail and cut up through someone's yard and into the street. Once there, I looked back toward the trail and saw that the figure was standing on the edge of it. After that, we went back to my house and talked about what had just happened. As a couple of notes, I'm sorry if my story is kind of a run-on. Like I said, this was the first time I've ever shared it anywhere. Also, there haven't been any bear sightings up by my area, but we have had some bobcats and some cougars. Not sure what it was. I don't think it was a Bigfoot, but if it was human, then it had to be some 8-foot tall guy in the woods behind my neighborhood at 2 a.m. So this was the summer of 2012, and I was probably 15 years old. I had my first job as a counselor in training at a fly fishing camp for kids at Antelope Creek Ranch, which is around the backside of Mount Shasta in California. I had attended the camp for several summers in my youth, and this was the first, or maybe second, year that I had returned as a CIT, since I wasn't old enough to be a counselor yet. There was one other CIT with me who was around my same age, as well as several older counselors. So this camp takes place on private property. There's a locked gate and everything. It's actually ultra eerie to be rolling up to the camp at night by yourself since you have to get out of your car twice to open and close the gate. We actually heard a cougar one night while we were locking it up coming in at the beginning of the week, though somebody was with me that time. What makes it worse is that there are no lights or anything, so leave your headlights on. Then it's a couple of miles down a gravel road. There's a small lodge rented out on weekends so people can come and stay and go fishing, but that was only occupied when kids' camp wasn't going on, so it was dark and empty most of the time when we were there. A little further past the lodge, and you hit our camp. It's a bunch of big, thick, cabin-like tents made out of canvas in a small clearing along with our cookhouse. Surrounding the area are very, very dense woods in all directions. All in all, a fairly remote location, pretty simple setup, and the darkest nights you could ever imagine. Beautiful stars, too. Now, getting to the juicy part. It was our second night of the week, and we had already had our campfire and had all the kids brush their teeth and get into their cabins. Small note here that the bathroom is on the back side of the cookhouse, about a 30-meter walk from the closest cabin. We had a short meeting, and most of the other counselors went to the cabins they were assigned to go to bed. Sky, who was the youngest of the counselors, was still sitting on the deck reading a book by a lantern. I walked around back to go brush my teeth, and when I came back to the deck to grab some of my things, I noticed Sky wasn't reading anymore. He was sitting right at the edge of his seat, eyes locked on the pitch-black forest. I was about to ask him what was wrong, but he shushed me before the words could even leave my mouth. He apologized in a whisper I could barely hear, and pointed out at something I couldn't see. My initial reaction was that he was messing with me, and I started to tell him that it wasn't funny. Then he had me move so that my line of sight could match his, and I saw it for the first time. There were these 3 little reflective spots deep in the trees. It was so dark, they were the first thing I noticed. "What is that?" I asked. "I don't know," Sky replied, "but they're moving. Look." Squinting through the darkness, barely able to distinguish the trees from the surrounding darkness, I could see that he was right. Only, it wasn't just the lights. Surrounding them was this massive black shape, maybe the size of a grizzly bear, but up on its hind legs. That's when I saw the lights blink, and then the whole shape moved behind a large group of trees. It very much appeared that the lights were eyes, the way they had blinked and reflected, only there were 3 of them in the shape of an equilateral triangle. At this point, Michael, who was the other CIT, comes out of the men's bathroom and looks equally confused and intrigued by us pointing our flashlights out at the woods. As if on cue, we hear the most horrifying sound I have ever heard in my entire life. The only way I can describe it is like an amplified snake hiss coming out of a coyote. I was so scared that I tripped over a board on the deck trying to scramble into the little cookhouse kitchen. We sat in there for almost 30 minutes, panicking and telling Michael what we saw. He thought we might have seen some reflective tape on a sign or a cow who escaped a nearby field. It happens. But couldn't explain the sound. We finally got our shit together and went back out there to look again. We pointed our flashlights out to the spot we saw it before, and there it still was, barely visible, just outside the range of our lights, moving occasionally just behind a tree only to peer out at us a moment later. At times it seemed like it was moving closer, but it was hard to be sure. Michael saw it that time. We had all seen it. We went back into the cookhouse again. By 3:30 a.m. we had checked on it and retreated back into the cookhouse at least 5 or 6 times because we were so unsettled that it was always there and hadn't moved on. We even tried yelling at it at one point. It seemed like it was waiting, or that it was watching us. I think it knew we were trying to see it, and it didn't seem to care too much. At some point, we decided to head back to the cabins that we were all supposed to be in. So the plan was, we would just run as fast as we could without turning our heads to look into the woods. If we don't look at it, it's not there, right? It worked great. We finally got to our beds. I was in the girls' cabin, and the other 2 went to the boys' one. So I'm laying there, unable to sleep, thinking about all the weird shit we just saw out there. An hour or so goes by, and I still can't sleep. All of a sudden, I hear footsteps coming through the gravel. It's this thick, crunchy volcanic stuff that makes a lot of noise when you walk on it. The footsteps came right up to the side of the canvas tent, Literally, whatever was out there was standing 4 inches away from me, only separated by this thin layer of fabric. I waited for them to walk away, or to come into the tent, or call out to me, or do anything. But they never walked away. There was just silence. I waited another hour, maybe more. There's no way anybody could walk through that gravel without the whole campsite hearing, and I know they walked right up next to me and never went away. It felt like I had just fallen asleep when I was woken up by some loud gunshots. They sounded close, but not right in our camp or anything. Safe to say I didn't sleep anymore that morning. Also that morning, I asked the guys if they heard any of the gunshots, and they did. We also went to go check out the spot of the woods where we thought we saw the thing lurking around. Nothing reflective, no strange, hulking items. But behind the large group of trees, there was just this large, freshly dug pit into fucking hell. I mean, this hole was like 4 feet wide and at least 10 feet deep before it looked like it turned. We didn't see any evidence of a shovel, and the ground was too covered in pine needles for us to find any good prints, human or animal. We were so creeped out, we genuinely didn't know how to react after we saw that. I wish I had taken a photo of the hole at least, but I didn't have a smartphone with a camera or anything. By the end of the week, the hole had been partially filled in. Not by any of us, I might mention. The other counselors totally made fun of us when we told them we thought we saw something strange. They jumped to the conclusion that we thought we saw Bigfoot or something, when in reality I truly have no idea what we saw. I returned to that camp year after year and never saw or heard anything quite like that. Michael also returned for several years and would refuse to keep his back turned to that particular spot in the woods at night. We talked about it a few years later, and everything he described still matches what I think I saw. I just wish we had an explanation. I want to preface this by saying that I generally consider myself to be a rather skeptical person, and have written off most of cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as straight up bunk until this event. I try to see if there's a realistic reasoning behind most encounters and stories, if that makes sense. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this story. It was the late summer of 2005 in Northeast Ohio. I was heading into my junior year of high school. I was spending the night over at my best friend's house, and we decided for the hell of it to just go crash outside for the night, with just sleeping bags. It was a peaceful enough evening. The weather was nice, balmy, kind of warm, and the air rang with the pleasant symphony of crickets and far-off spring peepers. Skies couldn't have been more clear, as it was that special sort of feeling in the air where you were far enough away from the last time it rained that the air didn't feel heavy anymore, and actually felt inviting instead of humid and miserable. This was as close to a picturesque summer evening as you could get. Everything was blanketed in the dark blue elegance of the evening light. Falling asleep was easy enough. This was a year that mosquitoes were remarkably in pretty low numbers, making sleeping unprotected with just a sleeping bag simple for once. Eventually, as bad luck would have it, I had to answer the call of nature, so I was roused from sleep to do so.
My buddy's yard was a fairly large-sized one with an area of woods bordering most of it. After finishing, I staggered back over to my sleeping bag and noticed that my friend was not in his. We were staged a few feet apart in case a bear came and got someone in the middle of the night or something. It would leave enough time for the other one to run to safety. You know, bro stuff. In any case, I catch him in my peripheral vision just kind of standing along the side of a shed that was in his yard. I wasn't kidding when I said that this night was picturesque. The sky was so unnaturally clear that the starlight and what little of the crescent moon we had left led to quite a bit of light despite being in the dead of the night itself. However, the area where we chose to pee, with the shed included, happened to be nestled along the part of the yard that was the thickest with trees, leading to a large portion of the yard still being under heavy shadow. Kind of funny to think about, isn't it? Having a well-defined area of shade in the dead of night when you expect everything to be dark. Oh, have I mentioned that at this point it was also suspiciously quiet? The idyllic chirping of the frogs and crickets that had earlier ushered me to sleep was now nowhere to be heard. I hadn't realized it when I first woke up to do my business, but it was quiet the whole time since I had woken up. Honestly, the fact that it was so quiet may have been why I woke up in the first place, on top of answering nature's call. Focusing my attention back on my friend, I'm noticing that he's still standing by the shed. He was around the corner away from me, so I had to approach him from behind, and thankfully it seemed he was going to be done using the bathroom. And thankfully it seemed he was done going to the bathroom as his pants were up. "Hey, what are you doing just standing around there?" I ask as I circle around and approach to his left. I didn't even need to wait for an answer before I immediately saw what had him frozen. Roughly about 30 feet away, hidden among the thickest area of forest in the yard, way back behind the shed, it stood. I'm not the greatest with words, so please bear with me as I try my best to describe what befell my eyes. This creature was perhaps a few inches taller than myself, and I was 6 foot at the time. However, that's where the similarities end. It stood on 2 legs with a hunched posture, as it appeared to have had its shoulders raised up with its head leaning slightly forward. It had arms, but the forearms were a bit longer than the upper arms, culminating into sickly-looking hands ending in long points, almost like claws. Though bathed in starlight and shadow, I could discern the skin of the beast was about a dark blue, dark grayish color. The head itself was mostly obscured by the shadows, but retained a general humanoid appearance. I couldn't make out a mouth or a jaw, but the most unnerving thing about it was that its eyes glowed red. Well, perhaps glowed is a bit of a sensationalist term. It actually looked more like the red eye effect from old photos. However, it definitely illuminated the area immediately around the eye sockets. So perhaps illuminate is the better term. This creature was so sickeningly frail and thin in build that there was no way it could have been a neighbor fucking with us, as it didn't even seem physically possible for something so thin to even be able to support weight on such a frame. And then it started moving. At this point, my fight-or-flight response told me to go screw myself, and I stood frozen in fear, just like my friend. The beast, already a horrific bastardization of the human form, now grotesquely bobbed its body up and down, as if attempting to take off in flight. I didn't notice it before, but there appeared to be a sort of cape behind its back. Though I say cape, it appeared to be of a ragged, fleshy texture, as if the skin on its back was flayed off and was dragging behind its arms. This sickening flesh cape waved with each flap of its arms, giving the illusion of wings. But that wasn't even the worst part. It emitted a noise. This wasn't a growl or a roar or even a scream. The sound it made was akin to a raspy inhale, like someone deeply out of breath. However, it still wasn't quite like that. There was like a sort of reverb to its breathing. It echoed quietly, yet still managed to be one of those sounds that you feel in your bones, each graveling breath raking its claws into your very soul as you're already frozen in horror. This dance felt like it went on for hours, but in reality it was only a few brief moments that passed. Our bodies finally made enough adrenaline that we were able to bolt and sprint to his house. We talked about it a few days later, but after a point just didn't feel like reliving it anymore. Until we researched what cryptids were and settled on the idea we came across, and decided that people would think we were just full of it, and decided to not bother talking about it at all. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered, but this experience has subconsciously kept me terrified of being in wooded areas after dark for all these years. In fact, last weekend my wife and kids and I were camping at a state campground, and it was the first time I had been outside at night in the woods since that day, and I was scared all night long. Thankfully, nothing happened, and we had a nice weekend. But it's crazy that this experience has affected me for so long. My wife was the only other person I shared this experience with, and at first she laughed it off, thinking I was kidding, until she saw how solemn that I got when I talked about it, and could see that it clearly was not a joke to me. She then confided in me that she's experienced her own paranormal things, so that's fun too. Superficially, I would say it resembled what people have described as the Mothman, but I never actually saw it take flight, and the eyes didn't glow nearly as bright as reports made it out to be. Also, the wings only looked like wings when it was flapping its arms, and I doubt that it could have actually flown with those raggedy skin flaps. But I'm definitely not going to be trying to figure it out. The only other guess was some kind of crawler maybe, but I never saw it make any other action aside from the bobbing and arm waving. I'm a mortar infantryman for the Army. We're trained to deal with deadly situations and be prepared to fight to the death if needed. My experience happened approximately 4 years ago, but he hasn't left me alone since then. One day during January that year, my parents had me walk the family dog, and my dog, so I decided to bring them to the golf course that was shut down for the season. Now, across the golf course, there's a small forest area that I usually walk them in because it's the closest that I get to the forest since I live in the city. Now, I live about 20 minutes from Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's very industrialized here, and it's one place you wouldn't expect to run into something like this. Back to the story, I went in through the opening and went down the trail. That place always felt like it was really off for some reason. I don't know, call it a sense that something is wrong with it, and the fact that there's no sound in the woods. I ignored it and went on with their walk, and suddenly I felt like I was being watched. I couldn't tell anything with all the snow on the trees and the fact that there's no snow that fell from them either. So like a dumbass, I ignored it again and continued on. I went out the other side of the forest and headed up a hill that leads to a road that leads to the end of the golf course. I felt the feeling of being watched again and turned around on instinct and saw it. I'm a person who always believed in the supernatural and enjoyed studying it, and I knew what that thing was. It was a Wendigo. I knew I needed to get out of there. For those who don't know, a Wendigo is a mythical creature in Native American folklore. It's believed that it's a carnivorous monster that never stops eating. I ran as fast as I could with the dogs across the street, and it started to chase me. I almost got hit by an oncoming van, and he stopped and looked at what I was running away from, and immediately got back in his van and drove off faster than he did before. While the thing was distracted, I ran as fast as I could, and like a dumbass, I ran back to my home. Once I got home, I acted as natural as I could and went to my room. I tried my best to calm down. By dinner, I had calmed down, and I ate. Once it came time to go to bed, that's when it started to get creepy. To explain the layout of where I am in the house, my room is right below the roof, and has another small roof that is above the front porch, which is right outside my window. I shut my blinds and got ready for bed, but then I heard footsteps on my roof, followed by a small thump right outside my window. I saw the silhouette of it. That fucker was hunched over, looking in my window as if he could see me. I was terrified by this and couldn't sleep at all. I couldn't even breathe. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, which was only about 2 hours. After that time had passed, he gave up and let out a scream. It was like a mix of the alien scream and a cat getting skinned alive. My parents wondered what was going on, and I made up some bullshit excuse. They believed me and headed back to bed. There was no need to get them into this, and it's not like they'll believe me anyway. My dumb ass didn't even take a picture or a video. That wasn't the end of it. This happened every day of every week for about 2 months, and then turned into every other day, to every other week and every month. Nowadays, I don't see it much, but I still see him every now and then. I still go to that area even to this day, and even found a skinwalker there. But that's a story for another day. If you ever run into a Wendigo, run. Run as fast as you can, as far away as you can. I don't care if you have to run to a new city. Fuck, I don't care if you have to leave the state. Just run so far away that you lose that fucker. Or the same events that happened to me may happen to you. If you have any information about how to kill this fucker, leave it in the comments. I've already tried holy water and it didn't work. Put that shit all over the roof outside my window and he was standing right on it like it was nothing. Be careful. Sometimes while searching for monsters, they'll end up finding you. My fiancé first encountered this thing in 2013. He and his friends were on a camping trip up in the woods in Maine. Middle of nowhere, literally. No houses, nothing for miles. They had a small fire going, but due to the rain it was hard to keep it going. They kept hearing something trying to creep up on them. It was kind of noisy and sounded big, but was only on 2 feet. They started throwing rocks in the direction where they heard the footsteps coming from, and suddenly this thing let out a blood-curdling scream. Nothing any of them had ever heard before. He describes it as something that sounds like a fox, but slightly more human. It went crashing through the woods super clumsily, but kept trying to come back. They had to fend it off for most of the night. The second encounter was about 1.5 years later. He was out on a solo camping trip in Vermont, since that was something that he enjoyed. He heard the exact same blood-curdling scream that he had heard the first time. He was just sitting alone in the dark, looking at the stars with no fire or anything, when suddenly he heard the scream again. He quickly packed everything up and just went home. No hesitation. The third time was tonight. He was supposed to go out to my car to grab us a couple bottles of water when he heard the voices. Due to us recently having someone coming onto our property and stealing from our landlords, he went to investigate. He calls me and tells me to let the dog out. As he was sneaking around, the voices turned into a snarling sound. He quickly stopped, turning off his flashlight, and dropped to the ground. The dog was standing next to him. Suddenly he sees 2 glowing eyes, and it lunges at him. The dog gets excited and starts chasing it. The whole time they're chasing it, it's screaming and running faster than our dog. Even though he was running with a flashlight, he couldn't make out a shape of its body. He says by how far apart the eyes were, it seemed kind of big. He couldn't get a shape or color, besides where its body should be was a slight discoloration of the darkness around it. It kept looking back at him while he chased, and its eyes were just glowing while it screamed. Our dog chased it off into the woods, but luckily she came back. I think it was trying to lure him in by making it sound like voices, but the dog scared it. He said he couldn't get a height because the eye level kept changing from squatting to standing up, and then it started running. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Or knows what this animal or supernatural thing could be?
Wraith-like creature at the crematorium. So yesterday I went to a funeral. As we drove into the funeral place, I saw a white humanoid creature in the window of one of the buildings. It had big black eyes and a wide black mouth. It was the size of a dog. It was white at first. I didn't think it was real, but then it moved its head to the side and I had my glasses on so I could see it really well. It had no ears. I don't know what I saw, and I've never experienced anything like this before. When I told my mom, she just said we're at a crematorium, we're surrounded by spirits. But what I saw didn't look human, and I don't know what it was.
I was raised in a household in which many different theories were accepted and discussed openly, and I had access to the book Message from the Pleiades by Billy Meyer. Almost exactly a month ago, I came into contact with a woman whose identity I'll keep secret. She's quite tall for a woman, about 5'9", very slender, and has blonde hair and green eyes. She's very beautiful too, I might add. I was invited to a house party with some of my friends, and towards the end of the night she came to the party with 2 other girls. I was stunned when I saw her. I didn't even try to make conversation with her. She had a powerful aura. Later in the night, the 2 of us were the only ones still awake. I sat down next to her and we began discussing the types of music we like. I, as a DJ and music producer, mentioned that I like techno music. Not the EDM stuff, but real techno, that's akin to the sci-fi of the music world. She explained to me how she as well had this addiction, and we continued to talk for the next 5 hours straight until the sun had risen. At one point she suggested looking at the stars. And the moment we went outside and pointed our eyes to the stars, we saw a startling shooting star that whizzed across the sky. She was very intelligent, but her emotional and spiritual intelligence seemed to be on another level. Like I was talking to a very old soul, a queen or a princess even. She let me talk for most of the time, listening to my faults with the most open of hearts. The whole thing seemed surreal, and time hardly existed. So my knowledge of Pleiadians makes her fit the exact profile. Very Nordic looking, beautiful, and extremely wise, like she's hundreds of years old. And as I've read, Pleiadians are the ambassadors for Earth as we enter the fifth dimension of thought. And she seemed there for a purpose. Thanks for reading. I'm still shook about this encounter and would love some feedback to make sense of this woman. Thank you again. I work as a paramedic in a rural area of Virginia. This entails a lot of backwoods mountain roads late at night. This encounter happened around the summer of 2016. One night around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., I was driving back from a call and was traveling up a road I've been up many times before. My partner and I were just listening to music and making the best of being at work. As I rounded an upward slanted curve, the headlight of my unit hit something that still gives me chills to this day as I'm typing. This creature was almost in a position that reminded me of a catcher in baseball, as if it were squatting beside the road maybe 10 feet away in a small grassy patch. It was so pale and white. I distinctly remember its arms and legs being so long. Just unnaturally long and slender. Its fingers were the same. If I had to estimate its height, I'd say it was easily 6 feet tall. It was facing away from me. I honestly didn't get a good look to see any facial features. I was literally shocked. I didn't speak a word. I turned to my partner, who was in the passenger seat, and the look on his face told me I was not seeing an imaginary thing. I said to him, "Please tell me that you saw that." To keep this PG, he agreed with a lot of colorful words. I may have been 50 yards away when we agreed to turn around and look again. When we got back to the same place, there was nothing. I honestly didn't have the courage to get out of the ambulance to check. My partner did pull out a spotlight we have in our units to check the woods, and again, nothing. I can't stress enough how pale, bony, and slender this creature was. It was like the pale man from Pan's Labyrinth, but I could see every bone in its body. I only got a 2 to 3 second look at this creature. Anyone have any insight on this? My parents live on about 30 acres of wooded land in the middle of nowhere. I was in high school at this time and was up late on a weekend. I remember that I had fallen asleep in the recliner in our living room and woke up at around 2 a.m. I sat up and watched TV for about half an hour and then got up to get some water before going to bed. Our kitchen sink looked out over our backyard, and I could see clear to the tree line because of a lamp on a telephone pole that we had installed for security. As I looked out, I saw something dash across the tree line for about 50 feet before going back into the trees. I can still see it in my mind. It was either a white or really pale gray, and looked like a person moving on all fours. There was no visible fur or clothing. I could tell it was large, at least the size of a person, maybe larger. It covered the 50-foot span in between 5 and 10 seconds. I was absolutely frozen in place for a solid minute after this encounter. My parents kept telling me that it was just an albino coyote. I know it wasn't. A few years later, I came across a YouTube video talking about really strange creatures caught on trail cameras. It was one of those low-quality edits that pop up on your recommended videos after a long video binge. Halfway through came an image that made my blood go cold. It was called a rake. This was exactly what I had seen. To this day, I will swear by it that I saw this creature, and still refuse to be outside at night at my parents' house. I work on oil rigs. I have ever since I was 20. And I'm 33 now. In 2007, I was working for Nomad Drilling. They have since sold out to Patterson, and we were drilling in the Haynesville for natural gas. Anyone who works on rigs knows that the work can take you way off the beaten path from what normal civilization is used to. Some places, you're on ranch roads for an hour before you reach the location, and others you're driving on roads canopied by trees in the backwoods of Louisiana. This happened to me in the latter. We were rigging down after finishing a well, and we were on our last night of the 7-day hitch. About halfway through our 12-hour tower. We had pretty much finished, and were making sure everything was tied down securely for the rig move. We killed the light plants, and the driller let us knock off early. This area was accessible outside Houghton, Louisiana, and the lease was actually on the back of the Barksdale AF base, but we had to leave the way we came in. Driving home at 2 in the morning seemed pretty normal at first, and I made it to the blacktop with no issues. The blacktop was still canopied by trees, and other than the lights from my truck, everything was pitch black. Out of nowhere, still basically in the middle of nowhere, this thing appears almost close enough to get hit on my driver's side. Okay, weird. But even more strange, he was leaning at what I swear was an impossible angle for someone to not tip over. Its hands were stretched, reaching towards my truck, and what I could see of the face was morbid and twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck raised, and I gasped it to speed back closer to society. It was about a 2-hour drive home, and I felt off for the rest of the trip. More oddly, I was working over on a separate occasion with one of the crews that work when I'm home, and another hand was talking about a very similar, if not identical, experience. I don't know who or what I saw, and the face could have been a blur from relative distance, speed, and the time I actually saw them. But who is out that late, and why? If someone was broken down, I could see them trying to flag me. But this didn't seem to be the case here. A few years back, I had gone out with some friends to the mountains for a camping trip. And by camping trip, I mean everybody gets drunk or high around a fire in the middle of the woods and then passes out in their trucks. I was always the youngest of the friend group, and this took place before I found my taste for mind-altering substances. I'm typically something of a skeptic, and if this had happened nowadays, I'd probably blame it on being drunk. But I was stone cold sober the whole time, which is why I feel so sure of what I saw. We're all out at the campsite, maybe 10 or 15 of us. I'm sitting on someone's tailgate smoking a cigarette when my friend, let's call him John, comes up to me clearly intoxicated. John was the one who I came out to the campsite with, and probably my closest friend out of anyone there. He asked me if I wanted to go on an adventure with him in the woods. I figured that if nothing else, I should probably go with him just to make sure that he didn't drunkenly fall over and hurt himself. Not to mention that even though I didn't drink or do any drugs back then, didn't mean that I was opposed to fun adventures into the forest. So we walked past the tree line that surrounded the campfire and into the dense trees. The moon was out and it was a pretty clear night, so although it wasn't dark, it wasn't pitch black. We came to a clearing that seemed to be made of flattish boulders and rocks. We were looking up at the night sky, and John was drunk talking and I was listening and nodding along with whatever nonsense he was saying. He took a seat on one of the flatter rocks and eventually just laid down and passed out. I tried to jostle him awake, but he just kept mumbling for me to let him rest a while. Since this is usually how John behaves when he's drinking, I complied and figured I'd head back to the campsite and check on him again in a little bit. I go back, talk to a few people, smoke a few cigarettes, and then decide to go and check on him. Maybe 10 minutes have passed. I'm walking back to the clearing where I left him and already from afar noticed that he wasn't in the same spot. I kept going, figuring that he must have gotten up and wandered off somewhere. As I'm walking, I notice a shadow in the shape of a human standing behind a shrub of sorts a few feet to my right. I stop, figuring that it was John messing with me. I said, "Dude, come on, let's go back to the camp." No response. Then I gave him the stereotypical, "Please, you're not scaring me." Still nothing. I moved closer to the shadow and noticed that I couldn't make out any distinguishable features. No shirt logo, no eyes, or any face for that matter. Just a vacuum of black that stood in the shape of a man, hanging out with me in the forest. I backed away, putting it all together that it wasn't John, and I ran back to camp. I checked the truck that John and I drove out there in, and he was sleeping on the bench seat. I did a quick head count, and everyone that I had recalled being at the camp was still there. The only thing that convinces me that this was paranormal was just the sheer absence of light that this thing took the shape of. Just pure darkness. Whenever I tell this story, John always gets chills, imagining that this thing was probably out there with him when he was passed out alone. The general conclusion was that John had stumbled back while I had left him, and I just didn't notice that he had returned. Like I said, I'm a skeptic, so I always try to rationalize these things. But this is the one experience that I've had that I just can't believe was simply my eyes playing tricks on me. I've heard of shadow people, but I always thought those were just what people saw during sleep paralysis. Not out in the wilderness, and not while fully awake. My sighting of the unexplained figure was around 18 years ago, early 2000s. I would have been 9 or 10, and my cousin who was with me is a year younger. My cousin Dan and I were sitting in my bedroom right before it was time to go to sleep, and we were horsing around, wrestling under the covers, etc. For some reason, I just felt this pit form in the bottom of my stomach, and felt like something was watching me. As I look up, my cousin's face expresses exactly what I'm feeling. We lifted the covers and looked to the hallway, where my bedroom door is. And bam, there it is. This man, I assume without skin, just muscle, even the face. Its eyes were pure red. It stood there staring at us from the hallway a good 5 to 10 seconds, smiling before we decided to go back to the child's safe zone under the blankets. After a few minutes, we peeked out, and it was gone. We never spoke of this incident until recently. He described what he saw to a T, to what I had seen. And that's how I know it wasn't just crazy child fantasy. So my question is, does anyone know what the fuck we saw? Was this some kind of demonic presence?
Humanoid encounter in England. This happened about 10 years ago. Me and DH were in our early 20s and renting a small flat in a tiny rural village in southern England. This didn't happen to me, but to my DH, who is a very straight-talking, no-nonsense person. I have never known him to lie. He has recounted this story to me a few times over the years and never strayed in the details. Whatever happened is a memory for him. He really believes that whatever he saw, he saw. Our home had woods and commons nearby that DH and his friends would play some sort of midnight commando hunting game in. They were out one night when DH came home early, panicked and out of breath. He said that he had been crouching in the bushes alone, but not too far from his friends when he noticed something else, also crouching, through the leaves maybe 10 meters away. It was humanoid in shape, but possibly with longer, leaner limbs. It had silverish skin in the dark. DH couldn't entirely believe what he was seeing and puffed himself up and started walking toward it. He said he got to about 5 meters away, fully expecting to find it was a deer or maybe a homeless person. As he got closer, he was increasingly sure that it wasn't anything normal. It had a humanoid face and was not frightened of him. He said the thing that freaked him out and made him run away was the fact that it didn't move or run. It just carried on watching him as he ran toward it. When he stopped and looked at it closer up, he turned around and legged it in the other direction and said he heard the thing move too behind him. He didn't look back, but as he was slowing down back towards the edge of the forest, he was quite unfit at the time, he heard leaves rustling to the side of him and saw it again through the trees, still watching him and only a few meters away. He pegged it again, but bumped into a couple of his friends on his way out. He told them to get out of the forest. His friends didn't take him seriously, but did amble back to our house without seeing anything. DH was scared, though, and you can tell the story still frightens him. Maybe he was in paranoid commando hunting mode and making fight eyes with a humanoid-looking tree stump. I don't know. I don't usually believe in these things or like to think about them. I did used to get an extremely creepy feeling from the woods nearby to that. You had to walk through to cut from the train station to our home. I didn't like staying in that flat alone. I also found it strange that there was wild garlic growing everywhere around the edge of our village, the next village, and most of the woods and commons. When we looked into the history of the area, we realized that the big manor house next to the village used to be inhabited by a soldier who survived being shot 28 times and came back to England with a harem of women. I half-jokingly suggested that this soldier was a vampire, and that's what DH saw. But I like to think it was just a humanoid-looking tree stump.
About a year or two ago, I was in my room sleeping. I was on my side facing the wall, with the closet in it. I don't even remember waking up. I was just all of a sudden propped up on one arm, still on my side, staring at the closet. I couldn't move either during this event. So as I was stuck staring at the closet door began to open, and I heard whispering coming out from within. I couldn't make out whatever was being said, but when the door was open almost fully, I saw a light grayish, off-white humanoid figure standing in the doorway. I still couldn't move, and then just like that, the figure was gone. The closet door shut, and I was wide awake, laying on my side without any memory of lying back down. It's important, I think, to note that I never felt any fear during this event. I didn't have any kind of emotional response at all. I was just watching what was happening. Any explanations for what it could be, paranormal or not, is appreciated. Also, I've never experienced any kind of sleep paralysis before this or after, and this has never happened again. I don't know how to tell this story without sounding crazy or nutty, but thinking about it still gives me chills. Especially since it makes no sense to me at all. Maybe someone can help me figure out what I saw. Okay. So this is my story. I was walking through the city I was living in on a snowy Saturday, headed to my friend's house. There was a good bit of snow already on the ground, and for what is usually a busy city, it was dead outside. I saw maybe 5 or 6 cars on my 20-minute walk and maybe 10 people along the way. But when I was about 3 minutes from my buddy's house, I saw this kid crossing the street with a backpack on. At first, I didn't think anything of him. But as I got closer, I got a really off feeling in my gut. I went from a happy mindset to feeling sick, fearful, and cautious, all in an instant. I was initially staring at the ground when crossing, but the feeling made me look up, and the kid was a few feet in front of me, staring at me dead in the eyes. When I locked eyes with his, I noticed something was wrong with his eyes and smile. His pupils were huge and yellow, with narrow oval slits down the middle, kind of like snake eyes. I remember him blinking, but his eyelids never moved. He had an evil smirk on his face, which made me feel nervous. When we passed each other, I looked back behind me, and as my head turned completely, he looked back and gave me a smile. And through the small slit of his lips, I saw his teeth. Each one was separated by a small gap, and they were kind of pointed. I turned back around and kept walking, but when I got to the other side of the street, I stopped for a second and the feeling disappeared. I looked back around, and the kid was gone. There was nowhere he could have turned, ran, or hid. Nor did he have a reason to run or hide. I told my friend when I got to his house, and he thought I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and the feeling I had. And it was as real as the ground we stand on. Has anyone had anything like this happen to them? Can anyone help explain what I saw?
Creepy camping experience. So, last summer my then boyfriend, now fiancé, had planned a trip to go visit Hocking Hills, Ohio for a weekend to get away. We both love camping and being away from the craziness that is our lives. So we rented a really cool cabin. If you're familiar with the area, it's set way back, but it's 2 stories, full bathroom, kitchen, living room with TV, Wi-Fi, massage chairs, LOL, etc. And cannot forget the hot tub. So one evening, after a long day of hiking and then celebrating with drinking and eating, we decided to hop in the hot tub. It was getting dark, so we decided just a quick relaxation session and then right back to inside. About 5 minutes into us being in the hot tub, I heard a noise. The way most of the hot tubs sit is facing the woods. Like 3 sides are woods, then one side faces the cabin you stay in. So I heard a crack of a branch, and to my man I kind of froze and looked at him. He laughed a little and said, must be a small animal. I let it go. But very shortly after, these noises started to get closer, and whatever it was started to make a weird crying noise. Kind of sounded like a dying coyote mixed with a snarling dog. It was so weird. It was far away at first, then it got closer and closer and closer. The only reason I knew I should worry was because my guy was not okay about it. Usually he's relaxed, cool, calm, and collected. It sounded like it went from the ground far away to being high up in a tree and right the fuck behind us on the ground. Whatever it was snapped a branch behind my right side. The door to inside was just 3 feet away from the hot tub, so my guy looked at me and quietly said, "Get the fuck inside." I know we were far set back in the woods. It's Hocking Hills. We're close enough to Athens to maybe run across bobcats. But it was so strange and odd. It was like whatever it was smarter than us and tried to sneak up on us. I'm sure it was an animal of some sort. But that was the first and only time that my fiancé has said that's the only phenomenon that I cannot rationally explain. It genuinely scared the absolute fuck out of him. Mostly just because of the sounds. We both grew up in rural areas for part of our lives, and I lived on a rural farm for a few years. And none of these noises were natural to either of us. If anyone has any opinions on what that creature could be, please let me know. The next day we had to check out, so as he was doing so, I decided to explore the little river that was about half a mile away from the checkout center. I videoed all of it because it was beautiful. But as I got closer to the water, there was a bark/growl that came from underneath a rocky area. I immediately booked it because, it was probably a giant-ass frog. But it scared me enough to just dip.
I get sleep paralysis, and it's always the same thing. A pair of young twins would appear. One was in a little dress and pigtails, the other with suspenders and slacks. They never talked, let alone gave me their names, so I called them Tammy and Tucker. They had black skin. Not like African American skin, but black as the night, barely more than a living shadow, with yellow eyes that flickered. The way that they moved was just freaky. They changed positions with my every blink, like a weeping angel, or SCP-173. For the first hour, or 5 blinks after I woke up, there was nothing but the darkness of my room. Then my vision would get slightly lighter, like I had an invisible nightlight that just lit up my whole room. On the next blink, my closet door would open, with a little clawed hand peeping out like it had been in the middle of clawing its way out of the dark depths of my closet. On the next, a hand would appear on the floor under my bed, and the one in my closet would be a full arm. My bed had about a foot of space under it, so I imagine a small child would have no trouble fitting underneath. On the next blink, the hand under my bed would be flipped, frozen in time in the middle of clawing at my bedsheets, and I would see Tammy's head poking out of my closet, staring at me. On the next blink, I would see Tucker's head poking out of the underside of my bed, and Tammy would have moved onto the ceiling on all fours, her head broken around just to stare at me. And then, on the next blink, Tucker's head would be upright, his chin resting on my bed staring at me with his flickering eyes, and Tammy would be closer. On the next, Tucker would be at the foot of my bed, on his knees, staring at me, and I would be able to feel his weight. Tammy would be in the middle of my room. On the next, Tucker would be sitting on my thighs, and Tammy would be at my bedside. And on the final blink, I would see their mouths open almost as wide as their heads, revealing rows upon rows of pearly white teeth, curved like daggers, ready to sink into my flesh, so close to me that I could feel their breath, cold as ice, on my face. Then, with the last blink, they would be gone. No traces of them left, except for the bruises that appeared on my legs the following morning. One of the many reasons I would have trouble falling asleep is that once the paralysis started, my eyes wouldn't allow me to surpass the amount of time that the twins wanted me for, and I couldn't just rapidly blink for them to go away. It was as though my eyes were being held open against my will. Once the paralysis wore off, about 4 blinks after the twins left, I wouldn't be able to make a sound until I drifted off to sleep.
This isn't my story, but one from my sister. We have grown up knowing we were different, and have had many odd occurrences happen in our lives. Last week, my sister and a coworker were traveling home from work down Highway 59. She said something huge swooped down in front of her truck, and swooped back up again in a second. She said its wingspan was wide, about 15 feet, and it had legs like a human. She said her first thought was that it was a pterodactyl. She said it was that huge. She asked her coworker if they saw it, and she said, "Yeah, what was that?" I asked her if it looked like a vampire. No, it did not. Did it look like Mothman? Yes, it did. She also said that whatever it was able to swoop in and out without being seen. It dipped over her car or she would have missed it. I haven't heard of Mothman sightings in Mississippi, but whatever it was, it really scared her and her coworker. What could it be? I asked the usual. Do you think it was an owl or a hawk or a vulture? No. It was massive. It was a white, 4-legged thing. I've been watching a lot of creepy encounter videos of this guy telling stories people have written on Reddit. A few of them seemed awfully familiar to the one that I just laughed off at the time, but now I'm seriously wondering if I actually saw something. I've never told anyone this outside of my small friend circle. I'm genuinely curious as to what others might think it is. This happened a few years ago. I'm from Ontario, Canada, and the amount of trails out here is astounding. The set of trails I walk on a regular basis cut through the city I live in and run along the river. There's plenty of wildlife, and on a few occasions I've sat and watched deer along the riverside. Whatever this was, it was unlike anything I'd seen before, even if it was only for a brief moment. It was in the summertime, so my friend Kinder and I were out on the trails while the sun was setting. It was getting dark, and because of how dense the trees and bush are along the trails, it was getting harder and harder to see even if the sun hadn't set completely. I had my phone flashlight out so we could at least see the trail. I also had some music playing. I had stopped for a second to change the song and Kendra suddenly goes, "What's that?" after a series of noises broke out beside us. Slowly, I turned my flashlight to the bush off on the left side of the path. The light shines on this large, white figure. It was so white it was pretty much reflecting the light I was shining onto it. It was walking on 4 legs and it was way too large to be a deer. Too white, too. From what I remember, it had skin. No fur. It wasn't a dog. If I could describe the texture in the short amount of time I had between me looking at this thing and booking it, it was almost rubbery. This was all I could take in before it ran off in the opposite direction of where we were looking. I didn't stick around for very long either. "Same" could have been my last words before the two of us took off running. We joked about it a lot, saying we saw the wraith and that my last words would have been "same." I surprisingly didn't feel any fear right away. The fear didn't set in until after we ran away from whatever it was. Maybe that came from the sudden shock of seeing this white figure running away through the trees and brush. Needless to say, I don't walk those trails at dusk anymore.
This story happened about 10 years ago. I was still quite young, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. Just to set the scene, my room was very small and I almost never shut my curtains, so light was always creeping on into my room, and since it was so small, I could always see everything clearly. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the feeling of being watched. When I turned around and opened my eyes, my heart almost stopped for a bit. There was this almost human-like figure right in front of my bed, not even a meter away. It was completely black, very tall, I would guess probably around 6'6", and appeared to be wearing a long black coat and a hat. It was absolutely terrifying. Not because of its looks, but because of the feeling I got just by looking at it. I couldn't see its eyes, but I just knew that it was staring right at me, and I could feel everything getting colder. I stared at it for what felt like forever, but after that I don't remember anything else. Just waking up the next morning still absolutely terrified. I never told this to anyone. Around 4 years later, I went on a trip to Berlin with my family. I shared a hotel room with my sister and we were sleeping in separate beds, both quite far away from each other. We went to sleep fairly early and nothing really happened, but when I woke up the next day, my sister told me something that sent absolute shivers down my spine. She told me that she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a tall, black figure wearing a black coat and a hat, standing right in front of my bed. It was very close to my body and appeared to be leaning down toward me. At first she thought it was one of my parents, but she felt extremely uneasy, and also said that the way it moved and leaned towards me seemed really strange and not human-like. I was shocked when she told me this, because I never once mentioned that I saw the same creature, and there is just no way she could have known. But yet she saw the exact same thing, watching me. Does anyone here know what it was, and what it might want from me? Or is there anyone who has experienced the same thing? No, I don't believe that I had sleep paralysis because I could still move around. Also, my sister saw the exact same thing, which would still be strange, since it was not watching her, but me instead. I used to live on a large property with a lake, 29 acres of land and heavily forested. I was playing. I was about 11 or 12 at the time, outside by myself right after the sun had set. I believe this was in the fall, so there were barely any lights to see outside, maybe except for a light on the house about 50 feet away from the swing set that I was on. Behind the swing set were really tall trees. Not many new or sapling trees were anywhere near. I know specifically that there were no trees short enough to have some owl or animal sit in them, because all the trees, pine trees, were mature and taller than my 2-story house. My mom came out to tell me that dinner was almost ready. When she did this, she turned on the outside light on the back porch, illuminating the area so I could see. I was still on the swing set at the time. I start to get up and I turn around, I think to find my flip-flops, when I see 2 bright eyes reflecting the light of the outside light looking at me from about 20 feet away. The eyes were well above any average human size, about 7.5 feet off of the ground, and they were large. I stopped, stunned and really scared. I was familiar with the woods right behind the swing set, and I knew something unnatural was looking at me. I couldn't see the body, but the eyes looked at me and I tried to get an understanding. And I thought of something massive and humanoid. Bigfoot. Remind you that no animal could have levitated on that spot longer than 5 seconds. Even then, there were no perches or anything there to suspect critters. So to end my experience, I ran inside, locked all the doors, and couldn't think straight for the next couple of days. Let's just say I never played outside on that swing set after sunset ever again. I still think about this, and it chills me.
Ominous under a streetlight. So this was around 5 years ago. A friend and I went to a local recreation center/park in our city. It was always pretty empty the few times I'd been there, except for the after-school kids sometimes. That summer we adventured day and night, always somewhere fun and always somewhere outdoors. Before I go any further, we definitely smoked flower on all adventures. Daily, smoked all day, functioning people, pretty much. We didn't hallucinate when we get high. We played on the swings and slides and decided to leave. Got in the car, turned it on. To the front right of the car was an orangish street light next to the bathrooms. Underneath stood a tall figure, maybe 7 feet. The only way I have been able to describe it is a pumpkin-shaped head, and it was off. We both froze and I looked over, he was driving, and asked if he sees that. I do, and we're getting the fuck out of here. Anytime one of us brings it up, there's an eerie feeling. That image is burned into my skull. I want to know what we saw.
A few days ago, I started writing a script for a horror film. I was thinking about my experiences as a kid and what frightened me. The scariest thing that I remember is the first thing that came to mind, and also the most recent one that I can recall. When I was 7 or 8, in the middle of summer, I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought it was because I was cold, which was uncomfortably odd because it was summer, and my bedroom is upstairs and insulated. I moved my curtain aside to see if the window was open, but it was closed tight. While I was looking at the window, I noticed a man standing in the street. The street lamp was on his back, so I couldn't see his face, but he was looking toward our house. What I noticed was that he was very tall. I think now that he was probably around 6'7". It scared the crap out of me, so I pulled the curtain over the window and used the tacks from one of my posters to tack the curtain down, since the window didn't lock. I covered my head with my covers, because I knew that my dad would say it was a nightmare and give me a hug before sending me back to bed. I eventually did fall back asleep, but a few hours later, I woke up again. It was still very dark out, probably around 1 a.m. The first thing I noticed was my bedroom door was open, and I always shut my bedroom door because I'm a very private person. I got out of bed and went to go to the bathroom. I made sure as I was leaving the bathroom to close my door. Once I was done, as I was going up the stairs, I noticed that my door was open. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. I went into my room, and my heart dropped into my stomach. My bedspread was torn from my bed. The sheets were strewn across the floor. All my pictures and posters were taken off the walls, and the dresser was emptied onto my bed. I went into my sister's room because it was right across the hall. I felt even worse when I did this because she was fast asleep and all the papers had been pulled out of her desk. I woke her up, shaking her as hard as I could. I told her what had happened, and we both ran downstairs to my dad's room. He helped us search the house, but we didn't find anything. Nothing had been taken, and my sister and I's rooms were the only ones that had been trashed. We both slept in the living room for a few days, because it was by my dad's room, but nothing happened, so we went back to life as normal, and eventually forgot about it. Until now. So a while back I made a post where I saw some creature crawling around in a forest area near my house. This time I was walking my dog around 12 p.m. since it's my winter break. While I walked past the wooded area again, I saw my dog growling, and suddenly I saw a tree shake. My dog's hair began to stand up, and I saw the creature again, or another one of them. This time it was walking, and it seemed to be looking for prey, sniffing around, and I forgot to state last time there was about 50 yards worth of grass in between us. So while it was sniffing around, it saw me, and it just stared at me while my dog tried to murder it, only me holding her back. It was still staring, and then it just walked away. I began to run home, again, scared for my life. When I got back, it hardly felt like I was out there for 10 minutes, but the clock said I was out for 55 minutes. I know another way to school and all that, although it is longer, but I'd rather not die. Any advice? Edit. I forgot to add this. It had brownish-black hair all over its body. Its eyes had a small sort of glow to them like a weak LED light, which was whitish. It was about 5 or 6 feet tall. It looked very muscular. It had what I think was 3 fingers and a thumb on both hands. It was after my Wendigo encounter in 2016, and my dog had died. In 2018, I was 18 and was told by MEPS that I would be going to infantry school in Fort Benning, Georgia in 2019. I was told by my parents to walk the family dog. He was an 80-pound pure-breed chocolate lab named Coco. I decided to go to the same area I usually went to, as I haven't seen anything different. My roommate was there when I found the first sign of evidence. We traveled to one of the ponds that was on the course, and I found a weird set of tracks. It was large bird tracks that then slowly morphed into dog or coyote tracks. I asked my roommate about it, and he didn't know. I only had a small amount of data about this, but it matched up with a skinwalker. The tracks changing in the snow to a different animal was the first sign, and I didn't want to stick around to find a 150-pound coyote. We headed back to my house, and we didn't speak of this again. The following day I went out to the same place, but this time I saw something in the distance. It looked human at the start, but as I got closer I knew what it was. I watched it slowly turn into a wolf. I didn't want to make any sudden movements. The dog was scared shitless and laying helplessly next to me. I waited for it to go away, but it didn't. It's like he knew I was there. About 10 minutes passed and he headed to the patch of woods that was across the street. I decided to use the opportunity to run home. I never saw him again. I still go to that patch of woods. I went there in 2019 with my fiance and family dog and saw nothing. It's weird, as when I'm there alone I find things, but when I'm accompanied I don't. If I had any advice, I'd say never travel in the woods or any place that has a lot of trees or places to hide, alone. And if you do travel alone, then bring something to defend yourself with. Stay safe.
Strange storm drain encounter. Hello, Internet. I recently had a strange encounter with something in a storm drain and would like to see if you guys could help identify what it was. What happened? Okay, so I work at a movie theater, which means we closed the building down at about 1:30, 2 a.m. So once the building was closed, a couple of co-workers and I decided to go to a hill across town that had a view of Nashville. We hiked up the hill, and once we got to the halfway point, they headed back to the car to drive up the hill faster, and I continued up alone. When I got to the top, a guy was hiding in a bush and shouted, "What are you doing here?" at me and started to run after me. Now, I know you're probably wondering where the creature comes in, and that is about to be revealed. So I ran down the opposite side of the hill towards a church and lost the guy tailing me. He went after my coworkers instead. As I reached the bottom of the hill, I found an open drainage pipe for the storm drains. It had bars covering the front at about 1 foot 6 inches apart, and decided to hide down there. I made a couple of turns and ended up about 3 or 4 streets from where I went in. The drain was about 5 feet high, so I could move quickly with only a little bit of a hunch. I decided I was going to wait a little bit to make sure I was safe, so I took my phone out and started to scroll through social media. After about 15 minutes or so, I heard what sounded like a rock getting kicked down the tunnel coming from deeper in, so I turned my phone's flashlight on to investigate and saw a pair of eyes reflecting back just on the edge of the light. The eyes were about 6 inches from the top of the tunnel. The rest of its body was in mostly darkness, but I could tell it was human-shaped, but I wasn't sure if it was bending over like I was, or if it was a shorter creature with a big head. We stared at each other for what felt like a minute, and it started moving quickly toward me again. Once it started moving, I took off back the way I came and ran to the church where my friends were waiting for me, and we left pretty quickly after that. I haven't been back to that hill since, but my coworkers and I are planning to all go down the drain together on Halloween just to see what happens.
I posted this in a UFO subreddit, as I was not sure what a crawler was until after doing a bit of research. There's a possibility that what I saw that night may have been a crawler as much as it could have been an alien. I never saw a UFO, but I saw an entity mostly associated with UFOs. I grew up in the USSR, in now northern Belarus, until I was 13 years old. 37 years ago, my mother and I saw an entity outside looking in at us through the window. It was hairless, pale white, huge, bulging black eyes, and it had teeth that were very small, very well spaced, skinny, and pointed, almost like an anglerfish. We hid for hours until we heard my father return home. We both looked out to see the being stand up from behind a wall. It was much taller than a human. It was hiding back there behind that wall, and I believe that it was waiting for us to come outside. My father drove up the driveway, and we saw the silhouette of its body from the back. It was hunched over, staring at the car. My father saw it in the headlights, and what it looked like, perfectly. He drove at it, and it ran away into the brush around the house. It never made a sound. It seemed smart but cautious, and the overwhelming feeling that I got that night was that it was vicious and violent. My parents spoke with the police, as we were so horrified about the encounter. After speaking to the police or the KGB, we were relocated and forced to never speak of the event to anyone. Within 30 hours, I was living in a new home nearly 100 kilometers away. I have searched for so many years for an explanation. I've spoken to government officials in Belarus. I have had interviews with people who lived near our home then, about 10 years ago. I have no answers